Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the BBC Happy Hour. My name is Todd DiPastino. I'm the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit headquartered here in Pittsburgh. We've been around for 15 years, creating what we call communities of listening around veterans and their stories. We have these military conversations, or these conversations about the military experience, past and present, every Monday night at 7 p.m. And it's a pretty simple concept. We just invite veterans and non-veterans to come, and we want veterans of every era, age, branch of service to come and share stories, to connect. We say connect, heal, educate, and inspire. And man, if all goes well tonight, we sure do have an educational and inspirational program. If you're not educated tonight, then you know a lot about your history. And if you aren't inspired tonight, then I think there's something wrong with you. Because the guest is Ambassador Theodore Roosevelt Britton Jr. And as far as I could see, he's not on yet, but he's one of 300 or so Montford Point Marines left alive today, which means that between 1942, 1949, he was a black man in America and decided to join the Marine Corps, one of 20,000 or so who served in a segregated Marine Corps between 1942 and 1949. And man, does he have a story to tell. What a fascinating person. I'm very grateful to Ron Hathaway, Vietnam veteran. Here he is. He's on the program here. I met Ron in New Jersey a few weeks ago. He connected me, Theodore Britton, and I think he's trying to get him connected here. But we'll get started, and when the ambassador joins us, we'll have him start sharing his story. Brad Washabaugh, good to see you. Heard some interesting things from Chip Cobb about you today. We'll have to have a conversation about that. Thank you all for joining us tonight. You know, we do have a sponsor, and we like to acknowledge our sponsor. And we joked. I think we've joked about this last week, but I'll do it again. You know, our sponsor here is Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, and they're a program dedicated to getting people to reduce and stop using tobacco products, and also to talk about the hazards of vaping, and to educate and advocate for healthier places to live, work, and play. They're connected to Adagio Health, which really focuses on women and family health care here in Pennsylvania and also in West Virginia. And we were joking, Sean and I were, that we have a big event coming up on Wednesday at the Rivers Casino. I think it's 650 people who have signed up for the event, and we're having raffle items and auction items. And there was a suggestion that somebody might donate some cigars to our auction, and I just thought that might not be good. There might be a conflict with Tobacco-Free Adagio Health, so. There might we don't have any cigars, but we're very grateful to Tobacco-Free Adagio Health for supporting our programs, and especially for supporting BBC Happy Hour, which that helps keeps the lights on. Sean, one of the things that we do here at the Veterans Breakfast Club is a weekly podcast called The Scuttlebutt, and you are host, and you have a new Scuttlebutt out today.
I do. The Scuttlebutt has been just this labor of love. It's one of those things where you're like, I can't believe I get to work and do this as a job, and I get to talk to amazing people about, with amazing stories. And one of them was this Adam Jones. He was an Army UH-60 Black Hawk pilot. Do you know what got him? Todd, I'm going to give you one guess. Looking at his picture, give you one good guess as to why he decided to be a Black Hawk pilot.
He could wear a beard.
He saw Black Hawk Down. And decided he wanted to do that. And he said his mom looked at him and said, "You want to fly the thing that crashed?" And he said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
But he has an incredible story. And you know what? He's done a lot of podcasts. But what made, I think, his appearance on the Scuttlebutt unique was that we got into the nitty-gritty of his story. And he said that during the podcast. He said, "I don't think I've ever recounted my story in this much detail. And it's one of adversity. It's one of disappointment. It's surprising because he didn't just go and join the Army and go become a Black Hawk pilot. He had to go through a lot of different things where he was rejected. He wasn't allowed in. He ended up being the last one picked for the squad. It's it was very interesting because what he did now is that he wrote this incredible book, Weapons of Mass Deception. After he got out, he had a rough transition. That's not unusual in this room. But he created an entire vocabulary for himself as to what he calls stealing his power and his purpose. And he wrote it all down after he sort of figured himself out, found his passion. And his new passion is sort of being a motivational speaker, not only for organizations, but for other veterans and for non-veterans. This is an incredible book. He has a workbook that goes along with this. And throughout his service, as we got into the nitty-gritty, he really talked. He was able to overcome all of that adversity, overcome all that disappointment, figure out what his passions were, because you can't just go be a Black Hawk pilot and sort of coast through your job. You have to be really focused. It's a very difficult thing to do. And he committed himself and was really, when he got out, how do you then transition from that level of commitment into sort of the civilian world where suddenly your whole life since he was a kid was singularly focused on becoming a Black Hawk pilot. And then he transitions out, and what happens? He kind of lost his way. So we had a really awesome conversation, and I'll put the link in the chat for people who want to go listen to Adam speak. I recommend it, and I recommend picking up his book, especially just to sort of see where he's coming from. And we had a great time.
Sean, yesterday I was at the retirement ceremony for David Seaver, Lieutenant Colonel, retiring from the Air Force after 20 some years. He's on this VBC happy hour often. I don't think he's here tonight, but man, that retirement ceremony just reminded me how profoundly different the military culture is from the civilian culture. And that when you leave that culture, man, you have to transition back to a culture that absolutely jobs are jobs. They're not vocations. The character, morality, ethics don't seem to be as important. And it was just so profoundly, again, educational and inspirational to be at the retirement ceremony. So I could imagine when he got out, it was a difficult transition. Our next online event is on Saturday, November 11th, Veterans Day. Veterans Day is coming up. This is a busy week, and so we're doing Vetathon again. This will be our third annual Vetathon. First annual Vetathon was 24 hours. Second annual Vetathon was 12 hours. We learned a lesson. And this will be 12 hours also. It'll start at 11 a.m. It'll go to 11 p.m. We have a lineup of guests. I'll just zip through. We have Vietnam veteran, photographer, combat photographer, and journalist Stu Rischel will be starting us off at 11. We'll FedEx ground veterans at 12. Holocaust survivor and French resistance fighter Kurt Leuchter at 1 p.m. We will have friends Lars from Sweden and Nick from St. Lucia with their logbook project, and Atlanta veterans, FedEx ground again. We'll have submarine veteran, World War II submarine veteran Julian Moses, David Krissinger, author of an Ernie Pyle book, Lioness with Daria Summers. Scott Masters, who's on the program tonight, will be bringing on 100-year-old Canadian World War II veteran Nick Janicki. And we will also then be going to Australia, I guess, for Dave Holland, who will give us a walking tour of Guadalcanal. He won't be at Guadalcanal, will he? Maybe Glenn Flickinger can tell us. And then our final hour will be the National Veterans Art Museum. And we're very grateful to Hughes Turner for connecting us and for getting that scheduled. I want to ask Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, you are with us tonight?
I am here, yes.
You are here. So is Dave Holland, are you doing that hour?
No, I'm not doing that hour. I'm fascinated that he's going to be on again. This is what I'm doing we switched the times. We'll talk. Well, no, I'm sorry. This is Monday night. This is Monday night. Yeah. Yeah. But no, the Dave Holland, I did not arrange that, but I remember him from when we did a couple of programs with him on Guadalcanal back in August of 22. Right. So what he's probably talking about, he's the guy, he's an American former Marine that married an Australian woman. He lives in Australia, but he worked and lived on Guadalcanal for a couple of years.
Yes.
For the Aussie government, as I recall.
Right.
And he basically walked every inch of the battlefield. He knew every foxhole. if you asked where so and so won his Medal of Honor, he had a video of it, et cetera, et cetera. So he's very good.
And he has a YouTube channel devoted to that.
Yes.
To kind of walk people through the battlefield. And I'm guessing he's going to, from his home in Australia, he's going to kind of walk us through some of the videos so we could see what the battlefield looks like today.
That's my guess. And I remember when we set that interview up with him a couple of years ago, I think I spent 3 days on his YouTube channel looking at those videos. They're really very well. It's all done with a handheld camera. I think just his iPhone, but it's really well done.
He will actually be hosting that hour.
Who's hosting?
Dave will be hosting that hour.
Dave is hosting it. Okay,
yeah.
Great. That'd be good.
And Glenn, you're hosting 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. and 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., I believe, on Saturday, November 11th.
So we made a bit of a switch. Sean just was able to pull this off in the last hour. I've got the 5 o'clock with Julian Moses, and now I'm going to take the 8 o'clock time slot with David Krissinger due to David's schedule. He's traveling out to the West Coast and needed to switch. And Scott was very, very gracious in being able to switch to the 6 o'clock hour for his program.
A Canadian being gracious? What a shocker.
He drinks all that Canadian beer. What do you do?
And then on Monday, Glenn, on November 13th, you are coming back to host this program about the Casablanca conference.
Yes, with James Conroy, who I've been in touch with for a couple of months. I read the book. One of these books where, frankly, when I first got it, I'm like, well, what is there about the Casablanca conference I don't know already? Why am I going to waste my time reading this book? And after about 10 pages, I was enthralled with it. He's a great writer, very, very interesting narrative style. And it's almost like reading a novel. It's really well written. And he digs into certain parts of the conference through the journals of many of the subordinate people that were at the conference supporting the big names like FDR and Marshall and Churchill, and presents a really different point of view of the conference. So it's really well done and a great read.
So that will be Monday, a week from today, Monday, November 13th. Glenn will be host. Sean or I will be there. And it sounds like a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Glenn, for hosting that, and welcome back from Italy.
Thank you. It was a tough call coming back, but ran out of money. What could I do?
I'm going to ask Ron Hathaway if we've gotten any headway with our guest here, Ambassador Theodore Britton. I just want to make sure that we're on track and he's on track to join us. Ron, if you want to unmute yourself. Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's still trying to get on the link.
Okay. He clicked.
Send it to him again.
Let me send it to him right now.
Yeah.
Let me send it to him right now. Should I send it to him by phone or by email or both?
Send it by email.
Okay. Hey, Glenn, why don't you start talking?
I was going to say, because we got talkers in the room across the board.
Right now by email.
Well, I tell you one thing I tried to do while I was in Italy, and I wanted to see some of the World War II sites in Italy. And I specifically wanted to go to Anzio, and was disappointed that we didn't make it. And it was all a matter of timing. There's a World War II museum in Anzio, an Italian museum. It's a private museum, not a public one. And we were going to go on a Monday, and I found out it was closed on Monday, which I should have known beforehand. So I tried to go on Sunday instead. And on Sunday, the train schedule from Rome to Anzio is like impossible. It's a local train, takes like 2.5 hours to get there versus an hour's drive. So we ended up not going to Anzio. So that was my only disappointment with the trip.
Glenn, I recently recorded a scuttlebutt with Paul Woodage. He has a YouTube channel, very famous YouTube channel. I encourage anybody here to look him up. It's WW2, the number 2, WW2 TV. And invite him on the Scuttlebutt, had him on. We had a great conversation. Would you call yourself, and correct me if I'm wrong, would you call yourself, Glenn, an armchair historian?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure that wasn't like I think it's like a term of endearment. Like, you may not have gone to like university, but you've read enough. You're very well read on World War II to consider yourself, a historian.
Yeah. I always hesitate personally to use that word in deference to the real historians like our Todd, who actually have a PhD in history. But armchair historian, I mean, I've been called worse, and I'll take that as a term of endearment. Yes.
Well, a couple of things Paul said during that scuttlebutt that I wanted to get your opinion on is, one, he said, because he also just extremely well read, and there's our ambassador now. So we'll go with one thing here, is that he said that the thing that makes a historian is someone who wants to impart that knowledge to someone else, as opposed to someone who may just sit there and read a bunch of books. Do you agree with that?
100%. I've read military history, particularly World War II history, all my life, which is getting to be a lot of years now. So I always had all that knowledge in my head, but only in the last 8 or 10 years, as I begin to lecture and be a part of the VBC and teach, does it really make you think about history in a different way? Because you have to try to, provide that knowledge to other people. And yes, that's I think he put it very, very well.
He's a Normandy expert. He lives there.
Oh.
And gives tours, and that's sort of how he started, listening to his uncle talk about World War II, and became obsessed with that time frame, and then just kind of happened into becoming a tour guide. He ended up, he'd be visiting there and then telling more than the tour guides were. He just knew a lot of it. So that scuttlebutt will be coming out in a couple of weeks. But I thought he was just such an interesting guy to have this. He had such a passion, and that's why I want everybody to check out that WW2 TV YouTube channel. He has such a passion that really just blasts through the YouTube for history. And I was energized by our conversation, because I left it really wanting to just go read as much as I could, because it was very enjoyable to talk to.
Yeah, I'm going to look it up for sure.
Let's see if we have our ambassador here. I know I saw him pop in the room.
Yeah.
There he is. Ambassador Theodore, we asked you to unmute. There you are.
Hey, okay. I do see a hello. Theodore Roosevelt, Britton Jr., thank you so much for joining us. Sir. Are you joining us from the Atlanta area?
Yes, I am from Atlanta. Yes,
from Atlanta. 98 years old. Ron Hathaway gave me your phone number. I gave you a call, and you said, like, I may have a night open for you guys.
No, so. The young girls are going to run away from me. You just gave away my age. My goodness. Gee whiz. The fellas are sticking around, of course.
Well, you're a voice of history for several reasons, but the main one that we're here with the Veterans Breakfast Club would love to talk to you about is
how many guys you got there?
I don't know. What do we got here?
About 60 in the room.
About 60 in the room, and then we're also on YouTube and Facebook right now.
Wow.
And then this will be archived, so people will watch in the future. And there are a lot of people who know a lot about World War II and even a lot about the history of the Marine Corps, but don't really know much about the Montford Point Marines. And I thought, I'm a historian, and I thought I might give just a few minutes of background so that people can get a sense of the significance of you joining us. The Montford Point Marines really began was made possible in 1941 with Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 8802, and that came before Pearl Harbor. That came in June 25th. Yes. And it came about, man, he was not happy to do it. It came about largely because of pressure from his wife, Eleanor, and also from the civil rights leader here on the left, A. Philip Randolph Jr., who was the president of the Brotherhood of Sleepy Car Porters, labor union.
Right, yeah.
And he was concerned that as war in Europe was ramping up and the defense industries were ramping up, that Black Americans were going to be shut out of these new jobs after over a decade of the Great Depression. And so he threatened a march on Washington that would occur. I think he scheduled it for July 4th, 1941. And it was going to be the March on Washington. And eventually, with Executive Order 8802, he backed down, but he got this. It was a desegregation order. This is an order from the president ordering that all war jobs with government contracts and all the branches of service must not discriminate according to race, creed, and ethnicity. And of course, not discriminating and segregating were two different things in 1941.
Well, one quick one. He said it is the policy of the government that there shall be no discrimination. It wasn't until a subsequent executive order was put out, I think it was 92, 95 or something, whereby there was some real teeth put into it, including the selective service. So, yeah. But that one was 1942 was when it really said that they didn't have a choice, and the policy was to be implemented in all of the government. He appointed the War Manpower Commission at that moment.
And the Marine Corps, for the first time, had to open up to Black members.
Yes,
and this guy,
you recall, guys were volunteering in 1941, and the first one did not get admitted and received until August 26, 1942, which shows that the Marine Corps was dragging its feet.
More than any branch of service. And I think in part because of this man who was the commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, Thomas Holcomb.
Yes. Well, he was following the 153-year-old policy of exclusion that no colored would be allowed in the Marine Corps. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he was infamous, and I think he remains infamous for saying something like, and you may know the quote better than I do, like, I'd rather have...
Yeah, given a choice of 5,000 whites or 250,000 coloreds, he'd take the 5,000 whites.
Right, exactly. And he would eventually, I think he wouldn't last through the end of the war as commandant, but that meant that 20,000 Black Americans joined the Marine Corps between 1942 and 1949, and they did their training in segregated Marine Corps facilities at Montford Point. Here's the Camp Lejeune complex, and Montford Point this is where you were when you joined in 1944?
It was the only camp over there, by the way.
Really?
It took the place of a little village owned by a family called the Montfords, and the second encampment was called Had Not Point. And later, when General Lejeune died, they named the entire place in honor of him. Even when I came in January of 1944, it was still known as New River, North Carolina.
Now, I've heard that there was nothing there. Did the recruits have to build Montford Point, or is...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The earlier ones had to continue building it up. Yeah.
Amazing, just amazing. And initially, of course, all the officers were white. I think the drill instructors initially were white.
Yes.
And then I think maybe the first Black drill instructor was this man, Gilbert Johnson.
Yes, I'm not quite sure, but he was one of the most notable because having served, I think 17 years in the Army and the Navy, he had stripes. Yeah. And so he quickly got the nickname Hashmark, but he's looked upon as doing a lot of things, which I think the word is apocryphal.
Yeah.
But I have a friend in Orlando, Charles Foreman, who will be 100 years old on March 15th. He was in the 9th platoon, and I think Ishmael Johnson came along somewhere around the 14th or 15th platoon. So this is how it was working out. Yeah.
So maybe not the first, but at Montford Point is now named, I think, Camp Gilbert Johnson.
Right. Yes. Yes.
I think. Okay. So that was just a little bit of a background. I just wanted folks to know a little bit about the Montford Point Marines and the significance of your service. Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood and background and growing up, where you came from?
Something I did some time ago. It was called the Marine Corps Taught Me, and I'll read it to you. I was born in the South, where good manners are something you learn quite early. For an African American, it also meant deference, subservience, and segregation, like bowing politely, speaking softly, and knowing your place. These were the days of white supremacy. In 1936, I moved north to New York. By January 1944, thanks to the Marine Corps, I was back in the South. Some would say Montford Point, an appendage of Camp Lejeune, was segregated. But how could it be? Our officers are white, but they were still part of us. When I arrived, my drill instructors were all black. But after 8 years in the New York City school system, studying under mostly white teachers and Southern teachers and black teachers in the South, all of whom loved me, I had learned to receive education from anyone who had something to teach. Each Marine, officer or enlisted, had knowledge I could use. For anyone above me, meaning had finished boot camp, I was taught to stand erect, look straight, head up, shoulders back, chin in, chest out, and to speak up. This teaching, unlike the other South, was anyone, white or black, officer or enlisted. In addition, I was not only issued an M1 rifle, but taught to take it apart, put it back together again, and to shoot it, to fire it. They also gave me a long bayonet, made me sharpen it, and taught me to use it, like punching it into a man's stomach or whacking his head off. Lastly, my judo instructor taught me to subdue with my bare hands. And for better or for worse, I can say that I never spilled the blood of anyone's son, husband, brother, or father. A New York teacher had spent 4 years teaching me to be a gentleman and a scholar. After a few months of physical training, the Corps sent me to the Pacific, where I was exposed to books of the United States Armed Forces Institute. My interests are eclectic. I'm interested in knowledge. I acquired, read, and digested every book on every subject I could find. I had been assigned to room with 4 medical corpsmen, college educated, older, who became my resources. In addition, my officers, some of whom were Southerners, encouraged me in my readings and readily supplied answers to my never-ending questions. Around me, the strange island of Guadalcanal drew my attention, educating me on this new environment. After 8 months, I was transferred to Maui in the Hawaiian Islands, where my cup of knowledge continued to run over. Many people in my life have often asked, how do you know so much? In a sense, I almost regretted not going to Japan or China to learn more. I did, however, thanks to Uncle Sam. I am grateful to the Marine Corps for all that it exposed me to and taught me. I've touched more than 166 countries, always learning more. Everything I learned day in and day out seemed to be built on what the Marine Corps taught me. That's it. Yeah.
So the Marine Corps, I mean, in World War II, the Marine Corps, that exposed you to a broader world of knowledge and other kinds of people, and it expanded who you knew you could be.
Yes. Well, not only that, I was reading one day in something, I don't know where I got it from, but it was about the Anglo-American Caribbean Commission. And it was based down in Trinidad because the British couldn't manage the islands. And so they were paying the United States, I think it was $1 a year, to manage those islands for them. And I read about Ralph Bunche, who was a young Foreign Service officer who was the executive secretary to it. And that put a bug in my mind about being in the diplomatic service. And ultimately, of course, 30 years later, I was nominated as ambassador. But anyway,
how many languages?
From Guadalcanal, we went up to Hawaii to stage for the invasion of Japan. and that began a new segment.
Hey, Ambassador, we have a retired Marine Corps colonel with us tonight. He wants to know why you chose the Marine Corps. Why not another branch of service?
It's interesting that I had been thinking about the Air Force, the Air Corps, but when I went through my physical exam, they said you have a choice of the Army or the Navy, and I said neither. Well, being from New York, the first words that come to their mind is wise guy. But they said, what do you want? And I said, the Marine Corps. And they said, the Marine Corps is filled. And I don't know what I said, but needless to say, a sergeant, gunnery sergeant, popped up. His name was Mortier. And he said, let me see what I can do. And he returned about 5 or 10 minutes later and said, you're in. And that was it. I have to think that my father, who had left the South and all the safety and security that he knew there in the South, had gone up north to find work. And maybe he had a little bit of the pioneer spirit that went off to me. I knew that the Marine Corps was new, and maybe that's why I took it. But from that point, I never regretted it. Mm-hmm.
I think you just reminded us earlier when you were describing the M1 and the bayonet and the standing proud and chest out and judo, how threatening it must have been in 1944 to have a black man in the South, be armed and have a bayonet and not be deferential, as you said.
Well, that began to haunt the Marine Corps much later on, more towards 46 and 47. The Marine Corps still had all black units. We could not, in any of them, by and large. Anyway, they were all in the South. And the idea of these men, 120 of them at a time, well-dressed, very proud of themselves, with rifles and bayonets and so forth, I think it must have become sort of threatening. So the Marine Corps wanted to move some of them up north. By the same token, we who were interested in the Marine Corps could not join the active organizations in any place. And so they decided that to satisfy our wants to be in the Marine Corps active duty, they decided they would set up an all-colored amphibian trucking battalion in Harlem. And I protested with some other guys. And I happened to have been a scoutmaster at the home of the second black congressman in the 20th century, Adam Clayton Powell. I got in touch with him. He got in touch with the Defense Department. And I received a copy of a letter sent by the Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps. It said, henceforth, all organizations will be open without regard to race, creed, or color. And that began it. And that was at the same time that President Truman. The pitch for all organizations will be open without regard to race, creed, or color. Yeah. Check it out. Yeah. Anyway, at that point, President Truman had issued his executive order in which he moved that the military should be desegregated. Actually, it was getting economically infeasible to have two separate militaries, and they were doing it in both the Army, Navy, and the Marine Corps. But
yes, you got recalled back into service after World War II.
Yeah, but at that time, of course, it gradually began to change, and it wasn't until it was really enforced until about 1954, in which case the first black fellas, maybe a little bit earlier, began to go down to Paris Island. The interesting thing, of course, was black women were the last group of American citizens admitted to serve in our U.S. Armed Forces, and that was in the Marine Corps in 1949. They sometimes get overlooked.
What do you remember of boot camp?
Boot camp was easy for me. This gentleman who taught me, he told me he wanted me to be a gentleman and a scholar. I don't know if he gave me any particular lessons for it, but he would remind me every time I saw him. And For some reason, when I was in the Marine Corps, it might have been the demeanor of my particular drill instructor, but no one seemed to, for lack of better words, no one seemed to mess with me. They were always kind, deferential to me, and even later on, when I was working in administration, the officers were always very supportive. Only one incident occurred that in boot camp reminds me of it. I was coming from the chow hall one day, and I was running, typically as all boots are supposed to run. And suddenly I saw one of my schoolmates, high school classmates, and so I yelled over to him, and I called out his name, George, George, George. And when he turned around, I realized he had a black tag on his cap, which meant drill instructor. He came over, he stiffened me up, read me the riot act, and told me how to respect an officer. And I said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And finally, he told me to take off. Well, I swore I'd never speak to that SOB again in my life. But anyway, about a month later, I had graduated from boot camp, and I was walking back from the chow this time with my hands in my pockets. You know, once you're out of boot camp, you're a real Marine. You can do anything. So with that, suddenly I hear this noise yelling, Ted, Ted, Ted. And my first reaction was, don't speak to me, man.
You're making my night, because I'm watching Ron and Brad and Corky and Bob and Fred all shake their heads laughing and laughing because they understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, I told him, don't speak to me. But he said, no, I might have saved you from some other grief from somebody else. But anyway, we got to be good friends. And years later, he was working on the Triborough Bridge in New York, and I'd always see him. Every time I came across the bridge, he'd always yell to me. And but this time, it was on an equal opportunity basis.
And your job
that was the only thing in the boot camp that I remember.
Was there schooling after boot camp for you, or no? Was there
Yes, I did. I did go to the schools company, and I think I took a cursory group on administration. But I had come out of the High School of Commerce in New York, so I knew a lot of the administrative things, and so I fitted right in. And one of the things I'd always say that one of the best courses I ever took in high school was typing. Yeah. In those days, you had to do the muster roll of officers and enlisted men, and it was done on a stencil, so that if you made a mistake, it was very difficult to conceal that mistake, and you'd sometimes have to start over. But I developed a very good memory because I had to know everything about every person in the company, including the officers, and so I just automatically began to know all of their names, rank, serial numbers. And even today, I can call out my rifle number, my serial number, and some other numbers that are very complicated, 6, 7, 8, or 9 numbers to them. Mm-hmm.
So what was your job when you were sent overseas to Guadalcanal?
Basically administration.
Okay.
And one thing about it is, again, I speak of this United States Armed Forces Institute. We call it USAFI. They received the books and different things relative to courses that were being taught back in the States. I found that books, I could get a first choice on them. I still have 2 of the books that were circulated at that time. One was called Give Yourself Background by F. Fraser Bond, and the other was Getting the Most Out of Life by Reader's Digest. And those books have been very, very helpful to me in life. Even articles like You Won't Be Snubbed. And so I found myself talking to people, and instantly they respond, talking to Queen Elizabeth. And even one day in Germany, not actually, it was we were guests of the German government, myself and my cabinet member, who was
Could you try again?
He was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and I spotted Clement, Clement, the Chancellor of West Germany. And when I saw him, I left my party and walked over to him and told him that I had that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, a member of President Reagan's cabinet, was with me, and I thought that the two of them should get to know each other. And so he said, "Oh, by all means, take me over to him." So anyway, so I took the Chancellor of West Germany over there. They shook hands and talked to each other and what have you. Then the Chancellor asked about walking back over to his car, which I did. And he was walking over there with his arms around my shoulder as if we were old friends. And if anyone had asked, well, how'd you get to know him? I just met him. But that was the kind of training and the kind of things that this gentleman in New York had put into me, that I was comfortable, but I could also make others comfortable. Even, as I say, highest people. And Queen Elizabeth came down a long line of so-called dignitaries. She was introduced and she would simply nod and keep moving, but not when she got to me. She spoke to me, I spoke to her, and minutes later we were still talking until she looked around and she said, "I'd better go. These people are looking at us."
So that man who told you that you'd be a gentleman and a scholar, did he ever get to see you kind of rise and succeed? And
no, and that's one of the things I regretted, because later on, as I began to, I majored in banking, and banking then was still looked upon as one of these dignified professions, and I became a sort of leader in the field in banking, especially in the Black community. There were the few black banks, and I knew about all of them. But in addition, as I began to go up, I worked in what's called the American Baptist Home Mission Society, and I was very active in a huge church in New York called the Riverside Church. The Rockefellers had put up half the money to build it. So Rodman Rockefeller was a good friend of mine. He was Nelson Rockefeller's oldest son, and he would come to visit me even when I was down at Housing and Urban Development. But in Housing and Urban Development, I was in charge of research, meeting with the President's Science Council. And so I would be in touch with men who, were mountains above me in terms of intellect and education. Finally, the men who became the nucleus of the research unit that I was heading had been the same men and women who put the man on the moon. They had to find a job after 1969, and most of them came to the Department of Housing and Urban Development doing research. These were the men I worked with and women I worked with. And believe me, that was an education themselves. But in life, I have always learned something from somebody, no matter the person's limit of education or whatever. Even now I say, if I'm going across Africa, I would not want a PhD from Harvard. I would want a native who had been raised in the jungles over there, who knew how to get across. Yeah. So,
it strikes me you became a diplomat, but you were exposed to war against the Japanese. Can you recall your feelings toward the Japanese? I mean, there you were at one of the most contested islands of the Pacific. Did you have hatred for the Japanese? Did you, what was your sense?
Again, I could not sense it at that age. But this gentleman, Dr. L. Walter Stevens, Phi Beta Kappa from Princeton, and PhD from Columbia, had taught me the concept of being a gentleman. So I was not angry at the Japanese. And as a matter of fact, I'm not quite sure that I had any hatred of the Germans. Now, I have to tell you this, that Americans gave me, not me personally, But Americans, especially from the South, with some of the training and some of the biases that they had inherited, were harsher towards us as their fellow Americans than the enemies themselves. In the Pacific, Tokyo Rose came on every night, and she attempted to placate, rather to encourage us to be hateful, but she didn't succeed. She did put on some wonderful jazz music and soul music, and we listened to it on a regular basis. But basically, we were doing our jobs and not necessarily building up any particular hatred. Something as simple as some of the fellows going to the South on trains and coming out of the train to try to get food. They were told that they would not be served, or they would have to go around to the back of any of the stores to get food. On the other hand, German prisoners of war would be marched right past us, taken into the dining room, sit down at tables with linen and all silver and all the other things, whereas the guys would sit in the trains unfed on their way to the battlefront in the Pacific. So if it's a choice of who are you kind of favorable to, interestingly, in a sense, the Japanese and the Germans were more palatable to us than many times of our own guys, because many times they carried out some of the biases that were in the Marine Corps itself. Yeah.
I guess that gets me to my next question, was how was your interactions with white Marines? I mean, there you are, both Marines, both having gone through the crucible of boot camp. And yet, was there still a difference, or was there more of a sense of equality?
You got two sets of them. Number one were my officers, who were wonderful to me. And secondly, they were some, by and large, some really good people that I really learned so much from. One of them was Captain McAllister, Marvin McAllister, I think it was his name. His father was head of the Smaller War Plants Commission, and he became quite a personality in San Antonio after his discharge. And my officers in my organization, who knew that I was kind of a studious intellect, were always encouraging me and sometimes teasing me about it. Okay, I did not have any interaction with any of the enlisted white Marines as such. As a matter of fact, by the time we reached Hawaii, there was a strange feeling among the Hawaiians. They had been taught that blacks had tails, and so we had overcome that by somehow letting them know that this was a falsehood, and we got to be quite friendly with the Hawaiians, who were darker than we were, but we became very active in their churches and in their schools and so forth. But in terms of interactions with the white Marines, none. Once I came out of the Marine Corps, I joined what was called the VA, and I did encounter some Marines there. One who particularly, it will always remain in my mind, chided me about not doing anything at all in the Marine Corps, or that black Marines didn't do anything. He didn't know, neither did I know, that something like 5,000 of the Montford Point Marines were up at Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And because they were in there later, suffered fewer casualties, but in addition, they went on the front and really helped the fellows who had been bombarded in the early landings. The Marine Corps, the Navy did not understand tidal waves. And if you recall, both in Tarawa and in the Upper Islands, the boats were marooned out there as the tide went down, and the boats did not go in further, but they were sitting ducks for the Japanese targets. One last thing, and I've never seen much reading about it, is because is that during the even the Okinawa, the Iwo Jima invasions, many of our men were wounded. Many of our men were wounded. Okay. The only ones around to give them to make blood donations were basically many of the men in the support groups, especially Montford Point Marines. So many of them gave, I'm told through the grapevine, that many of them gave lots and lots of blood to save the lives of the white Marines who were on the front. And I say that with a tongue in cheek because when I left the South, there was always this saying that if you had one drop of Negro blood, whatever that is, you were a Negro. Well, many of those men, fellow Marines who came out of Okinawa and Iwo Jima, were saved. Their lives were saved by getting so-called Negro blood, which we now know there's no such thing as white blood or Negro blood or yellow blood or anything else. It's just red blood. Yeah.
You were, after VJ Day, you became a civilian again. Then you were recalled back into service for Korea?
No, I volunteered.
Oh, you volunteered?
Yes.
Why in the world would you do that?
All right. I had decided that I would go back into the government one day. And remember, I still had this feeling about being in the diplomatic service. In fact, when I graduated from college, I applied to the State Department, but they gave me the horse laugh. I didn't hear from them at all. So the idea of being at the top of the diplomatic heap was something that I had not envisioned at that moment. But I did feel that I was going back into the government one day. And so I enlisted on the 15th of March, 1948 for a 3-year term. When the war broke out in Korea, I was recalled. And on the 2nd of September, 1950, I reported for duty back in the Marine Corps.
Boy, had the Marine Corps changed at all?
Yes, we were mixed at that time. And by the same token, I did note one black officer leading a group. I don't know who he was. I do know that John Earl Rudder had become the first black Marine officer commissioned in the regular Marine Corps in 1948. He eventually rose to captain, but chose to leave the Marine Corps. But I was conflicted between some kind of service to mankind. I even was admitted to the Virginia Union Theological Seminary to become a clergyman. But I wasn't comfortable feeling that I was going to be in a pulpit to do preaching. So I wanted to do something else, but other than civilian life, being in banking, which I did, and promoted the bank, by the way, it became the largest black bank in the country. I wanted to do something. I did become a member and a commissioned missionary of the American Baptist Convention, but ultimately, I thought that I would go back into government at some point, and that's when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I'm glad I did because I've grown to be very fond of the Marine Corps. As a matter of fact, when I was back in the Marine Corps, in the embassy, at one time, several of my colleagues had been assassinated, and I knew several of them. 2 of them at least, who had been assassinated. So I talked with the prime minister and convinced him to allow us to have Marine security guards in the embassy. This was unusual because the Barbadians in this Paris, in the English tradition, did not believe in weapons and so forth. So even the police did not have any weapons other than, I think, a club of some sorts. But he agreed, and I was able to get Marines down there. And I wrote to the commandant to thank him, and he was so effusive and thankful. And it was on a first name basis that it reminded me that I had a different kind of a relationship to the Marine Corps as an ambassador. Being a presidential appointee directly responsible to the president meant that, and of course, an order had been issued that in every place in which Americans are posted, the ambassador is the number one American and represents the president directly, both as head of state and as head of government. So I realized that I had a special standing in the Marine Corps. Not believe in weapons and so forth. So not every weapons other than I think a club of some sort. So that was the way it worked out at that point. And as it was, General Wilson, Lewis Wilson, was the last commandant to hold the Medal of Honor, and he was originally out of Mississippi, but a person whom I grew to respect. I think he was the first one to propose Frank Peterson to be a general. Frank was about to retire from the Marine Corps because he knew that there was someone in the Marine Corps who was holding him back and had made a conscious decision in his own mind that as long as he was in the Marine Corps, no black person would become a flag officer. And as it happened at that time, there was still quite a bit of the buddy system. So the gentlemen generally proposed their buddies for the upper ranks, and we had no buddies in the upper ranks as such. But
this is a picture of you when you were graduated boot camp, I take it?
Say that again?
Is this a picture of you when you graduated boot camp?
I don't see it, but if that's with the barracks cap, yes. With the tall, that would have been it. With the other one, I was still in boot camp. The little cup, call it.
Hey, I'm looking at the clock. It's 8:00. I want to invite people to ask questions, make comments, especially you Marines.
Yes.
So let's do some Q&A. And before we do, I want to let people know that our new magazine is out. Elvis is on the cover. I think a lot of people got them delivered to their mailboxes this week, and I know 7,500 copies got delivered to my driveway on Friday. So we're looking to get rid of them. I know Jim Jameson, who's on tonight, he came and picked up about 1,500 copies. He'll be mailing them. If you want 50 copies, 100 copies, 20 copies, let us know. We will put them in the mail to you. If you want just one copy for you to read, we'd be happy to.
I'll give a copy to each one of my chapter members.
Oh, we'll send them to you then. Thank you very much, because this is the advertising that we do. And if people here on this Zoom call and in Facebook and YouTube land, if they don't get the magazine, it's because we don't have your address. We send this out free of charge, quarterly. I'm a writer, historian. I love to write up the stories that we hear. And this is our latest issue. So please do let us know if you'd like to receive a copy. And then we also want to encourage people to take our survey, and we will put the link to the survey here in the chat.
I don't see myself, but do you see this medal?
I was just going to get to that. That was going to be my question. You received a Congressional Gold Medal in 2011, correct?
Do you know the history of it?
No, please do tell us.
The very first recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal was George Washington for being the first American officer to free a city from the British, which was Boston.
Whoa.
And it was actually gold at that time. And it was by the Continental Congress. That's why it still bears the name Congressional Gold Medal. They call the Medal of Honor the Congressional Medal of Honor, but the Congress has ceded its final authority to the president. Once the various candidates have passed muster and so forth, the president does not have to go back to the Congress to get permission to issue it. However, with this one, it has to be unanimous. Only the Congress can approve this. This is by law, special law, and it's an appropriation of $30,000 in this case, whereby one gold medal was issued, and it's now in the Smithsonian. We received replicas, bronze replicas. I happen to be a snob, so I had mine dipped in gold. So it really looks as gold, and it says, "For outstanding perseverance and courage that inspired social change in the Marine Corps." Now, as a diplomat and as a commissioned missionary, I feel good that I have made an impact on people without having to use a rifle or bayonet or bomb to convince them. And I still try to help anybody that I can. And many of the Medal of Honor people are my good friends. They're always more curious about my medal than I'm about theirs, because theirs is so well known. The first Medal of Honor was put together in 1862. That was the Army. The next one was the Navy. And in 1946 or 48, I think it was, the Air Force got its own medal. The Army has one figure on it, Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. The Navy has two, the goddess of wisdom and the god of discord. And the Air Force has the head of the Statue of Liberty.
I am learning so much tonight. I'm not going to remember any of it, but what I'm amazed at, Ambassador, is as you're giving us this history, I see a lot of faces here on Zoom nodding. Chris Perolo, oh yeah. Bob von Bargen, oh yeah. This is all new to me. But what's striking to me is how, we so much talk on the Veterans Breakfast Club very much about moral courage and a valor. And what you exhibited in your Marine Corps career was a very different kind of moral courage. One that you said was kind of without bayonet, without the M1. This is, enduring a difficult time. And you must be grateful that you lived long enough to see the country change.
It is, and it's very inspiring. I'm almost 100 years old, so I can look back, and I've been a very close student, you might say, of all that's been happening. And believe me, I am so proud of all Americans for what they have done and how they have changed. And I know that some still have reservations on many subjects, and I respect their reservations. I only ask one thing: give me an opportunity to talk with them, and I think we can reach an accommodation. But as I say, I'm just so proud of it, and every day I see some things that coming up. I've done about 174 countries now, and even today, I was in contact with the King of the Congo people. He's head vice president of what's called the Association of Traditional Rulers, and I'm very close to the King of Albania, whose father was king, and he recently became the titular king with the death of his father. By the way, I have the Mother Teresa medal from Albania. But these are people who've added to my life.
Yeah. Yes. And I'm wondering, I'm looking at Ron Hathaway, another Marine, 81 years old. So you're 17 years.
To be 81 again. Golly. Young. I envy him.
Ron, I got to meet Ron, and I got to tell you, I got to meet Ron in New Jersey, and I got to tell you, you are one of the most intimidating people. You're 81 years old. Oh my gosh. The big Marine. When you joined the Marine Corps, I guess you couldn't have known exactly, what had come before Ron, but did any of what the ambassador has said ring true when you entered the Marine Corps? I guess it would have been in the 1960s.
Yeah, a lot of things that the ambassador has said, I can identify with. But I remember Sergeant Major Huff which was one of his drill instructors.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an opportunity to meet Sergeant Major Alpha back in 1962.
The longest serving
Oh my
sergeant major
gosh.
in the Marine Corps, 17 years as a sergeant major.
That's right. That's right.
You met him.
I met him in 1962 at Camp Lejeune. I was a Sergeant E5 then. And he was a pretty 6 foot, I think he was 6'6", 6'5". He was a big man. But he was one of the first drill instructors at Montford Point with Hashmark Johnson.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I understand that they named the base after Johnson after he died.
Yes.
Yeah.
1976.
Right, exactly.
So you were familiar, as a young Marine, you were familiar with some of this history.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And how about, I know this is not easy, but how about white Marines? Are you familiar with at all with this history, Colonel Washabaugh?
Yes, well, thank you. Ambassador, such a pleasure to have you on tonight. I think everybody's wants to ask you what's the secret to living to 100, but
well, one day I made a stupid mistake. I was headed to an airplane over in Washington, and it was only going to take me 10 minutes to get there, but I made a wrong turn. I made a turn going left, and in Washington, once you make that turn going towards the Capitol, you can't get off. So I missed the plane, and that plane crashed, killing everybody on board.
Oh, wow.
Tom said, "You were blessed." And I said, "No, I wasn't." And they said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I'm thinking of the 120 or 30 people who died. They were not cursed." So it's one of those things. But since we get about 7 trillion cells to form our bodies, we are just fortunate that all of them, a majority of them, seem to be in good shape, that they're not inflicted with any kind of latent disease or something that can take away people at an early age or leave them infirm or something like that. So we still have an awful lot to learn about the human body. And that'll tell us down the line. I may not hear about it, but some of you younger fellas, like that 81-year-old youngster, will know about it.
Brad, I just wanted to show a picture before you go. This is Huff, right? This is Edgar Huff.
Yes.
One of the first black drill sergeants at Montford Point during World War II.
Yeah. And as I say, he was the longest serving sergeant major.
Wow.
17 years. Yeah.
How great. Thanks for that education.
Well,
Brad.
Yeah, Ambassador.
Anytime you put in the name Ambassador Ted Britton on Google, you'll get a whole lot of stuff, including garbage. So this 98 years have been some that you say, wow. And you don't say wow because it's great and glorious.
Well, Ambassador, we have the Marine Corps birthday coming up on the 10th of November.
Yes.
And once a Marine, always a Marine. What lessons from the Marine Corps have you taken with you from your experience in the Corps and can tell us about today?
Well, I can tell you this, even when I was in Barbados as ambassador and in Grenada as well, I don't want to leave out Grenada because Grenadians are fierce. They always said he carries himself like the Marine that he is. Now, here I am up in my 50s, and people are still associating me with the Marine Corps. And I had left the Marine Corps, gosh, in 1951. I was 26 years old at the time. But as I say, much of the knowledge that I know about everything, including geology, psychology, medicine, so forth, came about my days on Guadalcanal. And it started a practice which I haven't given up yet.
Boy, how fascinating. Do we have any other questions or comments here?
Well, Todd, I did hear the word Grenada. We just had a show on the 40th anniversary of the U.S. intervention in Grenada. I'd be interested to hear the ambassador's view on Grenada now, 40 years after our intervention, and what he sees of the country and what about our involvement 40 years ago? How did that help that country?
Yes. Well, it's interesting for some countries that we've dealt with, we haven't got a full story. In fact, I'm not quite sure we know as much about Korea as we ought to. I've been there about 10 times now. But in the case of Grenada, um, when you think of what happened there, you'll say, how could it? For example, the Army, the Navy could not communicate with each other. And I'm told that many of them had to go to local telephone booths in order to contact each other. In addition, I don't think that someone taught the military how to distinguish between coral beaches and coral islands and volcanic islands. And so if you landed on a coral island with your 40-pound pack, you landed somewhere on soft sand, even when you were out in the ocean. But if you landed on the volcanic side, you went straight down. I have not really gotten a good fix on what kind of orientation they gave the guys. Why did they drop them into that areas? For example, in Grenada, ocean-going ships would come right up against the buildings on the shore and more. Now, that meant that on the same side, if you dropped a person in there doing an invasion, you lost men. So it's something we still continue to learn as we go through life and our military life. And I've been saying that I frequently cite, it says, too soon we get old and too late smart. Even though we've gone through wars and wars and wars, sometimes the men who have authority exercise the authority without the benefit of wisdom. I was part of a book called Echoes of Our War, in which a number of them complained about being ordered to do things which they knew were going to result in harm to their men. And yet they were forced to follow orders or be subject to court martials and whatever. One lives out in Colorado now who still has that bitterness because he had to see two of his men blown up when he had warned his superior that a road had not been cleared, and he was ordered to send his men. Well, there are so many good things that I can talk about, so why dwell on something like that? But it's just that, as I also hope that as we go into wars, that our officers will also listen to their men. And woe be unto the new officers who sometimes, because they are imbued with authority, they live on their authority rather than on the experience of those around them.
Hey, I want to welcome Steve from Kane, PA. Hi, Steve. Good to see you. You put a few comments here in the chat. You're a Navy corpsman.
Yes.
Yay! I really got a great education from those guys. If I'm today, it's because I got a great education from medical corpsmen, hospital corpsmen.
Well, I can't tell you what an honor it is to be in your presence, and I salute you and Hathaway for being Marines and climbing steeper hills than the rest of us typically had to climb. And I salute you both. And it was my honor to be a corpsman on USS Sanctuary. I volunteered for the Navy. 17, I couldn't get a job. And my father was in World War II PT boats, Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and which I just learned recently. But so off I went. I wanted to be a corpsman and trained to St. Albans, New York City, and saw the guys coming back. And invulnerable and young, I volunteered to be a Marine medic, and I was very, very fortunate they sent me to the sanctuary instead. Probably saved my life, and it was beyond an honor to looking back to. I worked with Dr. Fred Jackson, an amazing neurosurgeon, mainly neurosurgery. but we did everything, of course, open heart. We took half a brain out of 2 young guys. I mean, if anybody could save you, we would. We could. Yeah. And we
great difference between you and our adversaries. When you go to World War II Museum, you will see the canvas packs that our medical people used and went out on the front to save people. You will look at some of the Japanese equipment, huge boxes of equipment, which never went beyond the hospital or wherever they were stationed. They did not go on the front to save the people like we did.
Well, it's yeah, it increasingly. I mean, it's. I lost 3 friends in Vietnam.
Yes,
and all this it's on my mind every day. But that's another subject. I don't have to explain it. But yeah, it was quite an honor. The sanctuary was based out of Da Nang. We went Phu Bai Chu Lai Dong Ha, just which meant nothing to us. We were just like moles down in the operating room working. We worked as we needed to. I mean, you worked till you couldn't see the IV pole, literally, at 20 years old. But I loved it. I loved my job. We all did. It's increasingly valuable to me, and I owe the Navy a lot, also like you did, the Marines. That would take me 15 minutes to tell you everything as I, in retrospect, reflect on what I got from the Navy in many ways. But yeah, I hope to see you Wednesday, Todd, and be honored to meet any of you there. And Ambassador, again, I say it's just an amazing story, and I am in awe. I am in awe of what you've done. And
well, my hat's off to you fellas, because you went up front to save people. You didn't carry weapons, the bullets did not distinguish between you and those who were firing at them. You went up there because you were up there to save people's lives and to help people. And so when one thinks of what you've done, it's gosh, we can only have the greatest of admiration for those of you who call yourselves hospital corpsmen, medical people, and so forth. You put your lives on the line.
Well, I thank you, but I was very comfy and safe on the ship. My buddy Jimmy, a Navy corpsman, did get shot and killed immediately after going after a wounded. I played football with in high school, so I cannot ever begin to imagine the bravery and courage that someone like him had. Even though, I mean, everybody says, why did I volunteer to be a Marine medic? Well, the same reason I volunteered to go in the Navy, although quite a bit different, because I had seen all the victims coming back in our Naval Hospital in St. Albans, New York City. And a combination of, I can't talk about it.
Well, let me give you another one. Last week, I spent a couple of days with Medal of Honor winners, 41 of them. You know, they never said that they had courage. Courage was never a part of it, certainly not a medal. They simply saw a chance to help somebody, and that's what they did. Out of it, of course, came recognition that this was very courageous and that they were getting a medal for it. But to them, it wasn't. And they didn't even think about it. The fact that they could have gotten killed. Now, 5 young black Marines between 1967 and 1969 gave their lives to save others. Just jumping on a hand grenade, a bomb, I forget some of the names of some of the types of weapons, but they knew that the thing was going to explode. But they jumped on it to save their fellow men and not themselves. And certainly it didn't take courage, because if they ever thought about courage, they would not have done it. They would have said, I'll wait or something. So I talked with a lot of those fellas, and I was just amazed at how they went about doing what they did. Yeah, so many of them very young, In fact, I think one was 15 years old at the time that he got the medal. Now, these are not the only two blacks in the group, but I'm just saying, I'm talking about my fellow Americans. My wife and some other friends tease me sometimes that I can't see color, but of course, when you're going to two wars, bullets don't have color either. Yeah.
Ambassador, would you move your screen down a little bit? We're losing your.
Oh.
Little bit. There we go.
That's good. Thank you, Ron.
I didn't think it while you're seeing it.
Abdur Rahman says you're a living legend. We should drink from your wisdom while we can, and I agree. Also asked the question, did you ever know Chappie James, the Air Force 4-star?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I met Chappie, and I both came in the government, civilian government, as deputy assistant secretaries. He was a brigadier. He was a brigadier general. When he came out, he was a major general, and I became ambassador. And while I was in Barbados, he was promoted to 4-star. Okay, and I at first really got to know him when he was dedicating Moulton Field in Alabama at Tuskegee, and I was dedicating the city hall and the housing down there. Okay, years later, I was on my way to Texas, and I'm walking down this plain, and suddenly I see this young general, 1-star, sitting there, and I passed him by, and something suddenly said, "Wait a minute, stop." There was a time when if I saw a black man with a major's leaf, oak leaf on, or a silver leaf, this was hell on wheels, and I would be tempted to come back and practically shout all over him. Anyway, I went back and introduced myself to this young man and told him how proud I was of seeing him. And I asked him what was his name. He showed me his badge, Daniel F. James III, Chappie James. And by this time, I had married a young lady whose principal in her school his name was Chappie James. That was Chappie's older brother. They called young Chappie later on, after his older brother gave it up. Yeah.
And here he is in the middle here, Tuskegee Airman, World War II. Wow, that's just amazing. He died last year, I think.
Yeah,
right.
They some years earlier. They were the only ones, the Tuskegee Airmen, to get the medal, the Congressional Gold Medal, and in a sense, they had more star power because we did not have any officers at all during Montford Point Marines. Did not have any officers at all during World War II, but the Tuskegee Airmen had many officers. They were all pilots. At some were given another kind of designation, flight officer, something like that. But they got the reputation quickly of never losing a bomber. And whereas at first the white pilots, bombers, were a little bit reluctant, once they found out what was happening, they were insisting that the Tuskegee Airmen escort them.
And speaking of pilots, Ed Cottrell, he is with us here from North Carolina. Ed is going to be in Pittsburgh tomorrow. And many of you who are coming to our special event on Wednesday are going to meet him and hear his story. Ed, thank you.
Looking forward to it, Todd. I'm excited, and I want to tell the ambassador how much I appreciated his talk tonight. I'm really impressed, and I'm only 3 years older than you are, but I know you'll reach 101 also. So thank you for coming, and I just wished I could meet you in person.
Oh gosh, these living legends are just amazing.
By the way, I had some cataract surgery about 3 or 4 years ago, so I never used the glasses, whether driving or reading the paper or anything like that. So
wait, you drive?
Oh, of course I drive. Yeah. Yes. Quite some distances too.
You guys are absolutely just amazing to me. I'm looking at the clock. I see we have 5 more minutes to go. Bob Von Bargen, I thank you so much again for kind of bringing Ambassador Britton into the fold of the Veterans Breakfast Club. You and Ron, you mentioned.
Let me thank him too, because I want to say it. I thrive on people. I for some reason, I draw energy from people, whereas others are sort of devastated or something. But let me go into a place where I'm going to make a speech, and invariably I'll try to get to every table and say hello to the people in the place before I get up on the stage and start talking.
The energy you have is just amazing.
God, I just want to say that Ron Hathaway and I had the opportunity, it was about a month ago, maybe a little over a month ago, where we interviewed the ambassador, and we were on the phone with him on this Zoom call for almost 2 hours and 15 minutes. And you have the easy job, Todd, because Ron and I now have to edit that down to 30 minutes. And how do you edit gold? I mean,
you don't. You make it available. I mean, you maybe, have a 30-minute clip that is available to the public, and then you have the archived the edition that has everything. But
in talking to him several times, we would run into he would be explaining a difficult situation, and then he would say, "Well, I picked up the phone and I talked to the commandant of the Marine Corps, and we fixed it."
Right.
Yes, and I'm so sorry that Brother Smith has suffered his setback, because it's something to fall like that. I have an insert in my cap whereby it's plastic, and anytime that I see anything that could be something that bumped me on the head, I avoid it. But in this case, he was running and suffered this seizure and fell on his face. That, oh gosh, it's just hard for me to imagine what could have happened. Concussion, black eyes, and all that business. And not only that, he had been working 18 hours a day because the assistant commandant had not been confirmed at that time. And woe be unto the person who is nominated and acts as if he's got it in the bag. The Senate will strip him. So the assistant commandant could not do anything that really related to the being assistant commandant. Interestingly, for the first time in the history of the Corps, it has a black 4-star general. He's on duty in Stuttgart, Germany. I met him by General Langley. But when General Smith had to go off duty, that meant that the only 4-star general on duty at that time in the U.S. military was a black 4-star, the first time in history. Not many people would not have known the historical significance of it, but a few of us who served as Montford Point Marines, where if you had 6 stripes, and a white Marine came in the organization to be as part of yours, he would be in charge because of this letter of instruction 421. Here, for the first time, we have a 4-star black general on duty in the U.S. military, Marine Corps general. So
I'm looking at the chat here, and I just see, dignity, grace, intelligence. Thank you, Carol. You're a miracle, Glenn Flickinger. Absolutely. This is what an honor it is to be in your presence. I thought before we end the program, Nancy Smoyer, it is Veterans Day week. You're headed to Washington, D.C.?
Yes, that's right. It's the 30th anniversary of the women's statue. So there are going to be a lot of women there, nurses and donut dollies like me, and USO and special services.
So Nancy was a donut dolly in Vietnam, and you're just saying, hey, if anybody else is going to be there, love to see you there.
Yeah, I'm a volunteer at the wall, so I'll be there in a yellow hat.
Very good.
Good.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. Nancy, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thanks to all of you for coming tonight. Ron and Bob, thank you again for sending the ambassador our way. And Ambassador, thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your story.
Well, I'm honored to be with you, and thank you so much for tolerating me. Yeah.
All right. Hey, have a good week, everybody. We'll see you on Veterans Day, Saturday, if not before. Take care. Good night.
Thank you for your service, all of you.
Great.
All right. See you now.